Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be answering the question, why is Moses often pictured having horns? This is not a problem that everyone is familiar with. However, there's a very famous statue made by Michelangelo. It currently is in Rome. And in the carving, Moses is clearly pictured as having two horns coming out of the front of his head. And many people have pictured him with horns coming out of his head during the Renaissance art period. And it seems to be that there's a long-standing tradition that something has to be coming out of Moses' head. So today we're going to look at the reason why Moses often has horns coming out of his head, or sometimes rays of light that are shaped like horns. Let me first state that there's no reason to believe that Moses had horns. However, a lot of art throughout history has pictured Moses with such horns. The reason is because of a verse in Exodus 34. We all recall the story of Moses coming down from the mountain of God with the tablets and God's glory causing his face to shine. However, earlier translations of the Hebrew were not done very well. This led to a discrepancy in how it was read. I'm going to read two examples in English. The first reading comes from the NIV. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the two tablets of the covenant of law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. The second reading is actually an English translation of the Latin Vulgate, and it says, "And when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he held the two tablets of testimony, and he knew not that his face was horned from the conversation of the Lord." It should be clear at this point that somebody has translated something wrong, so we're going to have to look at the Hebrew language and possibly the Greek and make a determination on where the mistake was made. The difficulty here is that the root word is only three consonants, karan. The vowels are not actually supplied in the Hebrew language. In fact, at the time that the Latin manuscripts were being condensed and collated into more complete collections of manuscripts, the Hebrew Old Testament did not yet have the vowels added to it. Those were added later by the Masoretes. So when the Latin translations were made, they had to make determinations on the fly as to what to do with the missing vowels from Quran. The Hebrew word Quran can also be conjugated keren, and the difference is exactly what you might think it is. Quran refers to a radiance or a shining. It's actually a verb. However, keren is a noun. It refers to something that is horned or something that is sticking out of another object. With no vowels in the text, the Latin translators had to make a determination, and unfortunately, they made the wrong one. What is interesting here is that the Latin translators failed to utilize the Greek Septuagint, which surely they would have had access to. In the Greek, they actually did translate the Hebrew word correctly. In an English rendering of the passage from the Greek translation, it says, "And when Moses went down from the mountain, the two tablets in the hand of Moses, as then he went down from the mountain, Moses knew not that his appearance of the skin of his face was glorified when God spoke to him." So even though the verb is used a little bit loosely here, just saying that the skin of his face was glorified, it still is in the same classification as what we would get in the modern English translation, saying that his face was radiant or shining, not horned. There are two other passages from the Old Testament that may be useful in determining how this word could be translated. In Habakkuk 3:4 it says, "His radiance is like the sun. He has rays flashing forth from his hand, and there is the hiding of his power." Here we actually do see the noun form, keren, which gets translated as rays. It gets translated this way because it's basically following the context of the passage. We already know that it's referring to the radiance of the sun, or radiance that is like sunlight. So here, translating it as rays or rays of light would make the most sense. In Amos 6:13 it says, "We have taken horns to ourselves." Here this is a really interesting way to use the word keren because it's actually referring to power or strength. They're speaking about taking strength for themselves. In Amos, the word kerenayim is literally translated as horns. However, we're left to assume that there's a figurative use of the word, and the figurative use of the word is referring to strength. This is not uncommon throughout the Old Testament. We see also references to the horns of the altar being symbols of strength and salvation. If we think about the context of Moses, it seems here that his face would be radiant, not growing horns, as he was recently just encountering the Lord. We do have examples of this also from other ancient Near Eastern texts. For example, in the Enuma Elish, Tablet 1, it states, "When Apsu heard this, his face grew radiant, because of the evil he planned against the gods, his sons. As for Mumu, he embraced him by the neck, as that one sat down on his knee to kiss him." We see also in a psalm praising Ashur-nasirpal II, "In order to show the strength of my rule, the possessions of his palace I plundered. A valuable image of my likeness, for his temple I glorified. The Kumuhinians and the Patinians' radiance overwhelmed them." Again, in the 9th century Sundus tablet from Babylon, we read, "At that time of Nabu-apla-iddina, the king of Babylon, his heart rejoiced, and shining was his countenance. Towards Nabu-nadin-sumi, the high priest of Sippar, the diviner, he lifted his face, with his bright face and his ruddy countenance, and his beautiful, generous eyes. Happily he looked at him." So we can see from the ancient Near East and from the Bible, there's definitely a motif that a person's face would be shining with glory. And Paul seemed to recognize this as well. In 2 Corinthians 3:7, he states, "Now if the ministry that brought death, which was engraved in the letters on stone, came with glory, so that the Israelites could not look steadily at the face of Moses because of its glory, transitory though it was." Here, Paul is recognizing that the face of Moses had shone with the glory of God, so much so that the Israelites could not look at it. So it seems reasonable to conclude that the best translation of Karen is just to indicate that Moses' face was radiant, it was glowing, it shone with the glory of God. Moses was not growing horns. Thank you for watching to the end. Please remember to like and subscribe. And if there are questions that you'd like to have answered, go ahead and leave them in the comments. I'll be replying to comments and answering questions. And if there's something that I missed, please add that, because I can update these videos and make sure that any relevant information gets included.